Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is draw the largest shape I can see, which is the palm. So I'm just going to draw kind of the general shape of what it is, just kind of a rectangle, right? That's a little bit wider up here than it is down here. This part, the thumb part, is we're going to kind of draw that separately. Okay, so this part is kind of a different shape that's coming off of the main palm area. So we're going to draw that general form right here a little bit separately. And I'm going to go through and draw a line for the thumb. And then I'm just going to quickly do that for each of the fingers and a circle at the top where I think it kind of ends. And this will kind of help you map the gesture of the hand, like the placement of all of your fingers, okay? So, and don't worry if they're a little bit off. You can adjust them a little bit later when we go through and start making more adjustments. I also want to include the wrist. So the width of the wrist, I'm just going to measure with my pencil here and see about how wide it is compared to the widest point of my hand, which would be generally the chunk of the hand from here to here. And it's about half. So if I measure that on my drawing, remember we're looking at ratios, not exact proportions, although I am drawing my hand to scale. You're not always drawing to scale, but keep the ratio thing in mind. And I'm going to come down, make a point here, and a point here, and that's about how wide my wrist is. So remember when you're drawing, you're always making comparisons, okay? So next, now they have the larger parts mapped. To figure out the gesture of my fingers, I'm just going to start off by drawing all of the crease marks where my fingers articulate, points of articulation, right? So I got all of those down, and I can actually go in and compare. So this is my highest one, so I should actually probably adjust that. This one's a little lower, and this one's a little lower. And these two are about the same, and they are in my drawing, okay? So now I'm going to go through and do that same thing with these upper joints for my points of articulation. Okay, now that I have that mapped, the thumb is a little different. We'll come back to that. I'm going to now create these little rectangles for each of the sections of my finger. And the top is kind of a circled off rectangle. And just notice that it's not perfect. I'm not worried about perfect right now. I'm just trying to get the general shapes down so I can come back and adjust them later. Okay. Okay, let's tackle that thumb. So the thumb, it looks like it actually only has one joint here, but actually it still has three. It's just that this joint is inset more into the palm. The meat of this muscle is actually right here in the palm to give you that grip strength. So this is my first point of articulation, and my second point of articulation is here. I want to notice the angles it's happening at. This one is almost up and down, vertical angle, and this one is much more, because of the way my thumb is seated, it's a little more horizontal. So I want to make sure I draw that in my drawing so everything is kind of at the same proportion. And I notice that my thumb is kind of sideways too. So I kind of want to draw this top shape like I see it. So I can't quite see the nail. I can maybe see a little bit of the nail. Put a little bit of that in there. Okay, so that's good for now. Now that I have the general shape down, I'm just going to go through and adjust, make micro adjustments. now that I have everything kind of mapped. To me, if I look at my hand and I look at my drawing, it looks like this part is a little too wide. So I might kind of bring this pinky in a little. This line needs to come in. I also want to notice this kind of shape of where my palm meets my fingers. I think that's a really important moment in getting anatomy right. And if I notice this part, if I were to draw a straight line across, these two are kind of on this one line, and these two are actually dropping down a little. So I'm going to pull these fingers down. So if I were to create this kind of line right here, where these fingers meet should kind of correspond, right? Alright, so now I'm going to kind of draw in these crease marks to kind of help myself visualize the shape of my hand here. And there's a good bit of muscle right here, so I'm just going to bulk that up a little bit. Okay, so when I'm drawing this angle, if I were to just draw that as a contour line, it might be kind of difficult, but because now I have all of these separate parts, it's a lot easier to kind of go from one point of articulation to the next. So from this point to where it meets the wrist area, it's pretty much just a straight line. And I can figure out that angle using my pencil and then bringing it directly over to my drawing. Same with this line. It goes from here to here, this point to this point. That's almost vertical. A little, it's about 11 o'clock. So then I can just put that line in. And get those creases in. All right. So there's a bit of a bump where that knuckle is because there's some extra muscle and skin there. So I'm just gonna throw that little bump in. Okay, this is looking pretty proportionate. So now when I think I'm done, I'm just going to go around and double check all my proportions to make sure that it's in alignment with what I actually see. So I'm going to check and be sure that each tip corresponds to where it would be on the other finger in real life and in my drawing. And the width of the palm, the widest top point of the palm compared to the bottom point. And that looks about good. Also seeing where the thumb comes in relation to the other fingers. My thumb is actually right at that pointer finger crease. And in my drawing, it's a little short. I might be able to add a little bit more to the top of my thumb there. So the more checks and balances you do, the more proportionate your drawing will be. So once you've done that, then you're ready to move on to the tracing stage, where you will be taking a sheet of tracing paper and tracing your drawing 3 separate times, okay? And doing this, you really want to go on the contour, but I would also include some of the points of articulation, because when you're shading, it's actually going to help you understand where you are in the drawing. They're like landmarks. You can use those points of articulation as a way to know where you are in the drawing when you're adding value. Okay. Gonna throw those lines in really quick. Okay, so now I have my tracing. It's just kind of hard to see, and I'll do this in pen, so it's a little easier to see. Now I'd like you to do 3 tracings, and with each tracing I'd like you to use a different style of line to do your value. So really when you're looking at value, you're looking for the light parts and the dark parts of the object. So whatever's light is closest to the light source, and whatever is darkest or in shadow, we'd say, is furthest away from the light source. Okay, so when I come in here, because I'm working in pen, I'm actually just going to, I'm going to do this one in parallel kind of hatching lines, okay? So I'm going to start with the kind of the darker areas. Maybe I should put this a little closer. That's a little easier to see. Okay. So I notice everything on the left side is in shadow. So I'm going to stick with these parallel lines, these linear networks, single lines that are working together to create shadow. And maybe I'll do a little cross hatching too. So I'm kind of just going to go through and try to stay as consistent as you can with your line use, because I'm going to ask you to use a different line for each iteration. You're doing 3 of these. So everything on the right side, I'm probably just going to leave blank because, or use a lighter pen to just barely make a line in there. And remember, I'm continuing to always look and see what's actually happening on the object I'm drawing, because it's really easy to kind of get lost in your drawing and not be looking at your object very much. And you don't want to do that, because then you're just making stuff up. You're not really gathering a bunch of information, right? So notice how I'm leaving all the lightest parts clean for now. I'll come back and erase away my pencil lines and use probably a thinner pen So there's a little bit of shadow being cast off of this finger here, and I'm going to check and see. There's a little bit of shadow being cast in here. So inside the kind of corners of my fingers, there's really, really deep shadows because of the recession. All right, and here there's a bit of a shadow being cast off of my thumb, and so I'm just going to add a little bit of shading there. It's pretty light up in here. And the darker the crease, or the deeper the crease, the thicker the line I'm going to use. And the lighter the crease, the kind of faster, thinner line. So this is pretty thin, and then it gets a little darker here, so I'm going to make it thicker as I go. Remember, lines don't always have to be the same thickness throughout, and it's probably better if they're not. They're going to be more descriptive. Alright, I'm going to use a really, really light line here to describe this edge that's kind of being bathed in light. Oh, the sun just kind of went down, but... So this edge is in shadow, and it's a nice dark, thick, parallel hatching lines. But this one, everything on the right side is in light, and so I'm just barely making the lightest line there. Alright, so here would be one of your 3 drawings. The next one, you could use squiggly lines, you could use kind of bubble lines. I would go and read the Deborah Rockman reading on line sensitivity to get an idea of a bunch of different lines that you can use for your other 2 variations of your hand. Okay.